Okay. Listen to the, just over.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
So is the conference in there tonight? It's at the Great America?
No, that's not.
Oh, sorry, the Little America.
Oh, Little.
It's it's inside the main
Yes.
facility, okay.
Yeah. Yes. Can't miss it. No, you're not. They bring dinner and the grand ball.
Okay.
Have a bunch of breakouts. Then I kind of, it's the better breakouts.
Molly, you're lucky that I'm new because otherwise we'd be going by now. But then like board member Carey, don't forget to test the mics. Don't forget to. So,
It's 9:15 right now.
okay. 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 So I just want to welcome everyone out and yeah, just looking forward to a great committee. Recognize Vice Chair Bollinger, who is here. And I know I don't have to tell this committee, but if any mistakes are made, please let me know. And I don't think that needs to be encouraged. I think everybody here has a strong voice. And do we take roll call? No? Okay, just recognize that the whole committee is here. And so let's just start with the day's business. And we're very fortunate to have Garfield County Superintendent John Dodds here. So Mr. Dodds, if you want to come up. And this is item 2.2 on our agenda, Garfield County School District waiver request. And the committee is being asked to consider and approve Garfield County School District's request for a waiver from R277-419, paren 4. And so with that, Superintendent, you and I had the opportunity of speaking a little bit before today. And one of the things I noticed was that you seem to have done something really well because there wasn't, at least in the data we received, you seem to have a lot of buy-in, and that's not always the case. So just for our edification, could you start there and just tell us how you were able to do that, and then we'll open it up to questions?
Yeah, you bet. And I have to start by expressing gratitude. It's so fun to watch this committee come together and interact. And I want you all to know we have such confidence in the State Office of Education, and we genuinely appreciate what you do. I know you don't hear that often enough. And I know there's a lot of work that's being done, and it means a lot to us at the local levels. You know, and some of this is just personal perception. I don't have any evidence to back this up. So just kind of feedback on what we feel like we did well, and I'd love to take credit for all of it. But I happen to have a really good board that's really conscientious right now and really wants to listen to the constituents as best as possible. And so when we started down this pathway, right, of what's best for Garfield County School District, we began by studying the information, studying the data, what exists out there, and we didn't just look in Utah; we looked nationwide. What's the pros and cons of a 4-day week? And what we found was there's not a perfect schedule. That doesn't exist. And so that's one of the mistakes I think that often we make. We come in with a preconceived notion, or we come in with something that we're trying to sell right before we even begin. And our board was very passionate that we came in and really listened, and that we actually came with the pros and cons, and we were genuine about those pros and cons. So no one came in with an agenda. Within our organization, they directed me that we keep it short. And that's another thing that I think oftentimes can be a challenge, is that we want to explore it for years or explore it for months or whatever it might be. And so we get into when that happens, sometimes constituents can pick up on one or two pet priorities or pet things that make it to them a more valuable schedule. And so we stayed away from the really one or two ideas of why we should do this, and really got back into a bigger picture of why is this best for Garfield County School District. So as we presented, I went out and presented to all the communities. We're a county that's the size of Connecticut, with the population that's one of the smallest populations in the state of Utah. So we went across the county and did presentations to what we call our cone sites of Escalante, Tropic, Utah, and Panguitch. And again, we stayed very big picture. These are the things that we've seen across the nation where schools are on a 4-day week of what have become successes for them, and these are the things that are negatives and that may be consequences to us going this direction. And I think that resonated, right? People didn't feel like we were married to anything. We didn't feel like we were committed to anything until we got the feedback, and the feedback was a resounding. And I've said this kind of funny in years past, but you know, when 50, 60, 70% of your constituents want something that's consensus, when 80, 90%, it's a demand, right? So our community, our perception is demanding that we move towards a 4-day week.
Thank you, Superintendent. Questions, thoughts from the committee? Vice Chair?
I would just say thank you for the thoroughness of the report that you gave and for the survey and doing a widespread survey. I think that's really important to have all stakeholders surveyed. And so I just appreciate the thoroughness of investigating this.
Sure. Thank you.
Oh, I forget we don't. We've wrestled with these, you know, you've heard, we've wrestled with these 4-day school week waivers, and I'm maybe old fashioned enough to think they're not usually a good idea. And I was just looking at your scores, and, you know, I wish they were better. I wish, I wish
too. Yeah.
we were doing this from a high point of, we're doing really well now with scoring, so we can do what's more convenient. And I know it's not just convenience, but I just want to express, and Chair Carey said this a couple times, we should have a more objective process. We should have more objective criteria for this. Wish we did.
Mm-hmm.
So what we end up doing is hearing what the community wants, and then hoping for the best, kind of, and usually going along with what the community wants. As again was said, that it's good that your community is mostly united.
Yeah.
And I know you've got a strong board. I've known Myron forever.
Yeah.
I don't remember when I didn't know him. And so you've got a really good board, which is not always common in a small district. So
That's true.
that's a great support. So I know that's a little bit more of a comment than a question, but I just have to say, I always have a little bit of hesitation when a school district or a school wants to have less instruction.
Yeah.
That concerns me, but I support all the work you've done.
Thank you. It means a lot. And if you don't mind, if I could speak to it just for a second, because
Sure.
it is a concern, I think, that's shared amongst all educators, right? We don't want to drive ourselves down to the minimum or drive ourselves down to mediocrity, right?
Yeah.
I think we share that same vision of relentless pursuit of student achievement. That needs to be the focus. And when we find a change or an idea that could impact that, we want to make sure that it doesn't impact it negatively. And so we did focus on that priority. That was a gigantic priority as we discussed it as a board to begin with, right? If this could have a negative impact. And what we found is that there's a kind of a climate versus culture approach to it, right? Climate is how we feel about things, and culture is how things are actually done and how we actually do things. And that culture has to be a focus of some student learning for it to work. And really what we found with this schedule is that the schools, again, we tried to research this across the nation, the schools that went to a 4-day week and lost significant instructional time, lost significant student learning time,
Yeah,
right? And student learning dropped.
So intuitive.
Yeah, that's common sense, right? It's a natural thing. But what we also found is if we protected that instructional time and tried to keep it as close as possible, that student learning could even increase. And so really what it came down to is the focus on culture and changing and improving culture, from moving from a culture of what support to a culture of, like I say, moving to that vision of a shared vision of a relentless pursuit of student achievement. So I have confidence that as we move direction towards culture change, that's what will make a bigger difference than this type of
And
change.
just one final thing, there was one district, probably one of the earliest districts I remember going to a 4-day week, that did it for a few years and then realized this is not good for our students, and actually went back to the 5-day week. So I hope we always, both as a board and then you as a district with your local decision making, will kind of see how the results play out and
monitor that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And we've been lucky enough too, and we spoke a minute about this beforehand. If you don't mind me kind of moving towards that idea, we've had a couple of schools that we've experimented with in our school district with the 4-day week.
No.
They're again, we're quite a large district, and these schools we don't call them rural anymore. We call them frontier schools, right? They are really quite distanced, and so Boulder Elementary School services anywhere from 5 to 20 students depending on the year. During COVID, man, I will say one benefit of COVID is people came to Garfield County. That was nice. You know, people wanted to get out of the cities and come to our communities. But and Antimony Elementary have both been on a 4-day week, and we've seen the evidence has suggested that it's made a bigger impact on the climate for sure, and how parents and students and even teachers perceive their roles. But we also saw that we were able to protect instructional time and also be able to see test scores continue to rise through that time. So we're pretty confident we'll go the same direction.
Good. Just I hope we all watch what happens.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you very much. Thanks
you.
for being here.
Thank you. It means a lot.
Any other questions from committee members? Yes.
I actually am ready to make a motion, but I'd like to make a comment first.
Please.
Okay. I'm excited to see what happens. I don't have any hesitation over 4-day school weeks. I think that there's a lot more that goes into it. I think there are some real benefits to be realized. And I think that research is always a lagging indicator because you use old models in which to judge new ideas in a lot of cases. Yes, student achievement as it's measured is just one indicator, and one indicator that we need to pay close attention to. But even student achievement looks different. It's not a be all end all. This is the only way to measure it kind of thing. So, you know, at the end of the day, it's community decisions about what their children experience, and your community has spoken. And you as education professionals within that community have also indicated a decision-making process and a decision. So I don't have any reservations over 4-day work weeks or 4-day school weeks, which you're dealing with both, right?
That's right.
And so the only thing that I ask is that we continue to watch and measure and share the things that you find, because for some it might be great and for others it may not be. So I just don't think we should fear changing circumstances and changing opportunities and trying different ways to come at issues and problems and challenges that we're trying to solve. So having said that, I move that the committee approve Garfield County School District's request for a waiver from R277 419-4 and forward to the board for approval.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Superintendent Dodds, thank you very much.
Thank you. Sir, nice to meet you all. See you soon.
Okay, we'll go to our next item. This is 2.3, Interagency Data Sharing Agreement with Utah State University Center for School of the Future. And I believe Director Chalice is going to cue that up for the committee.
Okay, good morning, committee. My name is Katie Chalice. I'm your Director of Privacy. And I will be queuing us up, but I just wanted to make the committee aware that we also have Director Aaron Bruff here in case you have any questions about, relevant to his work or about anything. And then we also have David Forbush and John Jiang online, who are from the data requester. So they work for the Center of School of the Future at Utah State University. All right, so an introduction to this agreement. In this last legislative session, a bill was passed from Senator Fillmore that established a program for, it was SB 173 market informed compensation for teachers. So it's establishes a system that helps recognize teachers, exceptional teachers, and provide a stipend to them. And the legislation charges the Center for School of the Future at the Utah State University to run the program in partnership with the participating LEAs. So I'll note that it is a pilot program. So there's a number of, there are a number of LEAs participating, but not all LEAs. And the requester is seeking a comprehensive amount of data, primarily surrounding student achievement. And I think that's all I have to say to queue it up. So I'm happy to answer any questions the committee has.
Oh, sorry, Director, I just have a few. You said that there's several LEAs that signed up. Do you have that number? And can you break that out for the committee in terms of how many districts versus our charters have signed up to participate in this voluntary program?
Yes, I can. I need to find an email to do so. My memory is that there are 18 districts and 30-something charters, but that might also be a good question for the folks from the Center of School of the Future. Chair.
Thank you. And just a follow-up question. The data that we will be providing, is that identifiable student data or has it been de-identified?
It is identifiable student data.
And the students that they're requesting the data for, are we looking at segments of our student population? Are we looking at every student in our student population, somewhere in between? What is the breadth of the data request for our identifiable student data?
Yeah, the scope is large. So it's for every Utah student for the span of about 10 years. That includes students that are not participating, that are not from the participating LEAs.
And you see this every day, you deal with it every day. This looks like a very large data request. I can't recall a data request for identifiable student data that has been this large. Could you give us some perspective as a committee where this falls in terms of data requests and what's being requested? And I'm not saying it's needed or not needed. I just want to know the scope.
Yeah, you bet. So this is kind of an uncommonly large scope. And I've had this conversation with the Center for School of the Future many times. So this will be no surprise to them that this is my assessment. But it is uncommonly large. Typically, part of my role is to first determine if data sharing is legal, but then try to explore with the data requester the minimum amount of data necessary to accomplish the task. And so I've communicated with the data requesters multiple times about trying to see if there was a way we could limit this, the scope of data being requested, particularly because not all LEAs are participating. But their feeling was that in order to conduct the data modeling that they would like to do, that it necessitates a broad amount of data and would require data for all Utah students.
And finally, and then we'll ask the School for the Future, but the data that's being requested, do you believe any of the data being requested is unassociated with the model that they are building or unnecessary to that particular cause?
No, in terms of data elements. So, and by data elements, I mean the types of data that they're requesting. My feeling is that the types of data they request are clearly in line with what they're tasked to do, which is in part to assess how a teacher is aligned with their students' achievement. So all the achievement data and other data feels in line to me. It does, as I mentioned, feel like there's an opportunity for a smaller scope in terms of the quantity of the number of students that are involved. But the data elements themselves, I feel, are appropriate.
Okay, if there's no objection from the committee, we'll hear from School of the Future.
First, do you mind
Please.
I saw how large this is. I knew there'd be concerns. I know there'll be greater concerns among the whole board. But then I also learned, and one of your comments kind of prompted this, also learned that this is not just something the School for the Future wants to do. It's in fact been assigned to do by the legislature. And the board has been assigned to cooperate and collaborate. So I think that's a really important factor in this. This is not just one of these random, I'm a researcher in Dubuque and looking to use your data. So I don't know in which order you want to do this, Chair, but I think it would be helpful to hear from AAG Beal, who's very familiar with the statutory requirements. And so perhaps we hear from the School from the Future, and then we could hear from her. I could regurgitate some of the information she gave me, but I think she would do it much more effectively. So I'd like to hear from her after we hear from School from the Future.
Please, before?
No, after.
After?
Is fine.
Okay.
Unless you have a different.
No.
Druther. Thank you.
So let's hear from David. We'll turn the time over to you, and you can introduce us to your associates and take them in the order that you'd like to have them present to us.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for your willingness to receive our request and to engage us around it this morning. I've got John, our learning scientist here at the Center for School of the Future, which is on the Logan campus. And I've also got Dr. John White, who's with us, who's the primary statistician that does the work in terms of the modeling that we'll be using in the state. So he's here with us as well. And so I suspect we'll hear from both of them. I wanted to recognize Board Member Lear's comment that the center has been asked by the state legislature to implement this particular bill. And so we've been engaged in this since it was signed into law. And so that is true. And it is expressed that we're to be working collaboratively with the USBE in terms of accessing data to meet the needs of this project and this bill. So with that recognized, one of the things that, and then I'll invite John White to comment here. We're trying to, in behalf of the legislature, we're trying to build a model that would allow us to ascribe to teachers their productivity in terms of producing student learning. That's a challenging thing to do. And to do that, we're using what's called a value-added model. A value-added model basically looks at a teacher and ascertains as to whether that teacher has produced not expected growth based on that student's past history of performance, but unexpected learning growth, which would be then regarded as value-added growth, not just expected growth. It takes a lot of data to accomplish that. And so one of the contract that we've entered with SAS, they'll be producing up to four different models that could be used in our state. And as we use the breadth of data that we've requested, it'll all be used to then look at four different models and then to select the model that is most appropriate to meeting the ends of the bill. And so the scope of the data that we're looking for, as Katie already expressed, the data types are okay. It's whether we really need that breadth. So I'll comment on that briefly and then turn it over to Dr. John White. The extent to which we have the full body of knowledge means that we don't have to predict any longer as to what might have been had we had the full extent of student data in the state. If we have a third of the data, then we have to try to project or predict what might have came to us had we had all of the data, which introduces inaccuracies and error. So we're trying to do this in as fine a way as it can be done. And to do that, it really does require all student data. Some part of that's also because as you're trying to track students so that you can determine if a teacher's produced value-added learning for that student, it requires that we know all of a student's academic history in terms of their test scores so that you can then predict where the student would be in a subsequent year and then determine whether the teacher produced a learning level or amount of learning that's above what would have been anticipated. Because students move, for example, if a student were being educated in Moab Elementary and then moved to Granite later as a fourth grader, then some of the data wouldn't be available to us if we just had the data for the 55 LAs that have elected to participate. Some of those students have moved around, and if they happen to have left most of their performance data in another LEA and then moved into one that's participating, we wouldn't be able to get that data, which would then break that link for that particular student. And so there's a variety of different challenges like that. So with that, let me have John White talk a little bit about the work that he does and the need that we have for the breadth of data that we're looking for.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. Hey, good morning, everyone. I hope you were able to hear me this morning. So as David was saying, with these value-added models, we will be creating them for multiple years, actually. So we will be using data from the 23-24 school year, also the 24-25, 25-26, and years in the future. We will also run those value-added models for some of the years in the past. For each of those implementations of value-added models, we really follow students longitudinally over time. As David mentioned, we want to have all of their prior testing data to be able to create this expectation of where we think they would on average have ended up, so that we can determine that they actually made, in fact, more growth than was expected. So not only do we want to have all the student data so that we can have all the prior testing data for the students that are in the LEAs currently, and that may be in the LEAs in the future that are part of the pilot, but we also would want to have all of the statewide data so that we can utilize the relationships between all of the subjects and grades over time for the state as a whole. In other words, we would like to be able to look at the relationships between third grade math and fourth grade math and fifth grade math over time for all students in the state of Utah, not just the students within those the 55 or so LEAs that are part of the pilot. That will allow us to have the most robust value-added model, or create the most robust value-added model in general. Now, also, as David has mentioned, there are up to 4 different models that we are going to be comparing. In doing so, one of the things that you would consider is looking at the value-added results at the teacher level versus different characteristics of the school districts that they're within, or the schools that they're within. Ideally, you would be able to look at those relationships or comparisons for the breadth of all schools and districts in the state of Utah, and to be able to look at the differences in relationships between the value-added measures and these other various characteristics. If we just focused it only on the 55 LEAs within the pilot, we might not see the full scope of the relationship between the value-added measures and the different characteristics of those LEAs over time. One final aspect of the modeling itself, part of these teacher value-added models, they look at the overall variability of teacher value-added measures for the whole set of teacher value-added measures that are within the model. So the variability of all teacher measures in a particular grade in a given year helps to make better inference on individual teacher value-added measures. And so that variability ideally would be for the state as a whole. Having the state as a whole would give us the best understanding of what the total variability of teacher value-added measures would look like in Utah. One other thing just to say, with all of these points, if this program moves forward and expands scope beyond the pilot LEAs and is looking more at a full implementation, having the full statewide data would allow us to see kind of everything about the relationships between the teacher value added measures and these various district characteristics kind of across time and for the state as a whole. So for all of these reasons, again, ideally, as David was saying, and as the request was stating, it would be ideal to have that statewide data set of students.
Hey, John, may I ask a question? This is Chair Carey. My question is, you said, it may not, show the correlations that we want. You said it wouldn't be ideal. and I understand that the more data, generally, the better. But is there a middle ground that could be reached where we're supplying data, but not to the scope? Because I'm looking for functionality in what you're doing, not necessarily perfection. Because this is a pilot, right? We're testing to see what works and what doesn't. Does that test truly need to include the identifiable student data for every student? Every student in the state of, like, for instance, you have a 10-year look back period for your longitudinal data set, correct? Well, why not make it 12 years? Why not do it since the time they entered public education, right? We limit things based on their relevance. And my suggestion is that the further removed we are from the students who are actually being measured, and presumably that's the core base for that would be the students enrolled in these LEAs that have voluntarily subscribed to the program, isn't it less relevant?
So
John's trying to figure out my question. John, do you need me to repeat that?
No, I definitely
Okay.
understand the question. I guess I would say that, so we would still want to be able to create a value-added model that would set an expectation for an individual student based on the statewide relationship of test scores. In terms of middle ground, if it would be better, for example, to restrict some of the identifiable nature of the information down to a smaller set of students, but still provide the statewide data for all students, maybe not with as much identifiable information, but still having some form of student ID that could be used to longitudinally link students over time. That could certainly be a possibility. But the concern with only receiving data for the students within the LEAs that are a part of the pilot is, if for some reason the experience of students over time longitudinally, so looking at the relationships of the students' test scores in the most recent year with all of their prior testing data, if that relationship was different for that set of students in the 55 LEAs as compared to the statewide data set, that certainly would influence the overall value-added model and might not give you kind of the full picture of what a statewide value-added model might look like. And because part of the pilot program is to investigate whether this, really could be used as a statewide system, I would say at a minimum, you would want to have a kind of statewide growth measure, statewide value-added model, and have the student level data to be able to connect those test scores over time. Again, if it's the identifiable nature of the request, then there's the possibility of potentially limiting down some of the identifiable nature, but it again, ideally, you would still have at least all this statewide data connected over time. Does that make sense?
It does, and thank you for that. And I don't know, David. There's three gentlemen on the call. Are you expecting all three to address us preliminarily, or would you like to field questions from us? How would you like to proceed with your guest?
We'd be willing to field questions at this point now. Chair Carey, that would be, yep.
Great.
An overlay of the legal.
Maybe I could comment too, while you're organizing the questions that you have for us, that as we report each fall to the Education Interim Committee about the nature and the progress and the productivity of this pilot, I think that what they're going to be interested in knowing is how well is this being done? How useful is the information? And what would you recommend to us in terms of continuation of this beyond the pilot? And so because of that, I think we're trying to ensure that we have the rich kind of information that would allow us to offer comment beyond for the future. So that's one thing. I think the other is that I think everyone in the room recognizes that when you start to try to ascribe student learning to teachers, then, which is really important because that's their core mission, it's a tricky thing to do. And so we want to make sure that we have as fine and useful a data and as precise a data as you can have, so that you the discussions that occur related to the correctness of this program are as good as it can be, as opposed to starting at a much lower level, and that there's error that's or imprecision in the system from the beginning. So we'd like to try to have it be as precise a process as possible, because even with that precision, there's plenty of challenges with running a model like this. So with that said, we'll take questions.
Thank you, David. We're going to hear from Ashley Beal, who is our AAG assigned by the Attorney General's office. She's going to give us a little background on our legal obligations. And so we're going to go to Ashley first. AAG Beal, thank you. And yeah, could you lay the foundation for what we're directed to do by the legislature? What options do we have today?
Yes, thank you, Chair Carey. So as someone has already pulled up for me, anticipating it perfectly, the requirements come from the legislature in 53F 2-526. And there's a couple different provisions that kind of apply here. So the state board under subsection 13 is required. We shall collaborate regarding the data sharing and other relevant interactions to facilitate the successful administration of the program. And then subsection 9B kind of outlines, that we still have to comply with FERPA and other student privacy and data laws, which basically this agreement, the creation of this agreement is what FERPA would require to make sure, we're de-identifying and aggregating data, things like that. And so, yeah, we have to collaborate under the law to provide the information that they need to administer the program. I know subsection 1B defines how the eligible teacher is going to be determined, and it kind of talks about some of the data that goes into that. So it talks about student growth or achievement data, and then professional evaluations, parent surveys, things like that. So we do have to collaborate on those, and that's kind of our legal obligation there, but we also have to make sure that we're complying with FERPA and student privacy laws as well.
Any questions? Let me just put it, and then we'll go to Vice Chair Bollinger. I just Googled the definition for collaborate, and that says to work jointly on an activity to produce or create something. And so I don't read that as I understand the shall part, but the shall part to me is you've got to collaborate. And we can, I know that I've spoken to the School of the Future folks. I've spoken to our Director of Privacy. And I think that we have and we continue to meet that part of the code in 53F2526. But thank you, AAG Beal. And I believe Vice Chair Bollinger has a question or comment.
I just had a few follow-up questions, AAG Bill, about the code. From the code, my understanding is, the way that I read it, and please correct me if I have a misunderstanding, is that the participating LEAs will create a process by which they identify a teacher that might qualify. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and when they talk about those data pieces that we have pulled up for an eligible teacher, the way this reads, where it says student growth, professional evaluations, parent surveys, and other data, does that mean that they have to use all of those pieces of data in their evaluation of who's eligible?
So in traditional statutory interpretation, the and would make it yes. The and would be that they have to use all of those things. But I don't know. To be honest with you, the and would say yes, that it should be all of those things.
Can I clarify too, from the center's perspective of working in the bill, there are 3 required criteria: student achievement and growth, professional evaluation, and then parent survey. Those are required. The other data-driven criteria that an LEA may identify, for example, LEAs have been expressing that a high-performing teacher is a collaborative teacher as well. Then they can also use other criteria that has to be approved by the center, but they're not required. But the first 3 are required from our read of this. And the 4th, on the other hand, is not required, but they can propose different types of other factors that could be considered in identifying a high-performing teacher.
Chair, may I ask a follow-up question to the center? So in the data request, it's mostly focused on the student growth and achievement data. My understanding, and maybe staff can address this as well, is parent surveys and professional evaluations. Is that data coming then from the LEAs directly? Because I don't believe that's something we have at a USB level. Is that correct? Okay, so with this, is that correct as far as the center is concerned as well?
That is correct.
So my question would be is if we need all of the data from all of the schools for the academic piece, and we're trying to compare eligible teachers from the participating to all of the teachers in the whole state of Utah, how do we make that comparison or make sure that that's a fair assessment if we don't have those pieces of data for all the other schools in the state of Utah?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. If I can respond to that, if you're requiring it for all achievement and growth data to establish a value-added model, then the focus in that particular for student growth and achievement, it's really looking as to how much value the teacher's adding to that. That's the outcome measure. Professional evaluation, however, we're not necessarily tracking that one in terms of a value added. That's a predictor variable in terms of if a teacher performs well on a professional evaluation, then the assumption is, which unfortunately the literature doesn't support, is that the quality of performance on that professional evaluation will then predict the student's learning rate or the amount of learning that occurs. And so we're not actually looking for growth in terms of teacher behavior there. We're looking for growth and achievement in terms of the output, which is students. And that's true of also the parent survey. It's how do they perceive the teacher at this given time? We're not really looking at growth in that particular area. It's another dimension of the overall system, but it isn't being tracked, nor is there a growth model being produced around those 2 required elements.
So is the value, yes, well, yes, I'll just have one follow-up question. So is the value added model more specifically then focused on the student growth and achievement measures? Is that a fair statement?
That is correct, and it's exclusively focused on that particular criteria.
Okay, I have another follow-up question that I know Vice Chair Hart probably has some questions too. I just want to make sure I thoroughly understand this. So the way that I read the code is that the LEAs get to choose their process. With the center focusing on a value-added model, does that mean that you expect the participating LEAs to participate with that model, or will they be able to choose other methods for what they would like to do in their process?
Yeah, so the center has developed a process and a guideline and a number of different supports to LEAs that elect to participate. And so we've developed a set of guidelines that allow for some variability in the LEAs and how they develop their systems at the LEA level, but there's not. They don't. It does require that they use the growth and achievement, and what we're strong proponents of is that they use the value-added growth model for the achievement and the growth criteria. So So yeah, there is some choice within it, but there's also some guidelines that try to aid the LEAs in having some uniformity in terms of how they use those three criteria, the required criteria.
Okay, I still have more questions, but I'm going to go ahead and pass my time for a minute because I want to make sure everybody has a voice.
Okay, Vice Chair Hart.
Yeah, so first of all, is this data, are you contracting with other agencies to help with this? Did I hear the name of an outside contractor?
Yes, that is true. The SAS organization, John White representing that this morning, has been contracted with to aid us in doing this, the establishing the value added model for the first criteria, which is professional or academic achievement and growth.
And so, Director Chalice, how is that handled since there is another layer?
Yeah, it's a good question. In the agreement language, it allows for, and this is standard in typical contracts, it allows for the data recipient to work with subcontractors and sub-processors. So our assessment is that SAS EVOS would constitute a subcontractor.
And then I heard correctly that we are using historical data as well for this going back in years. So how are you ensuring reliability given all of our checkered history with student achievement data and different assessments and results in that way? Poorly worded question, but I think you probably understand what I'm asking, maybe?
Is that a question for the center?
Yeah, because even in my short history on the board, we've had student achievement data challenges.
Yeah.
How is that being handled with issues of reliability?
Yeah, statistically, John, would you be willing to address that, John White?
Yeah, no problem. So the idea here is we would be creating a statewide value added model first with the 23-24 year as kind of that year that we're measuring the value added measures for. But we want to get a good look at some of the prior years of data, if we have enough data to be able to see kind of the changes over time of the value added measures. Ultimately, we also are going to be measuring it in the 24-25 and 25-26 school year. We want to look at kind of the value added measures over time for teachers within these LEAs, for example, to see how much shifting has occurred. I will also just say that if your question is more about, achievement has kind of either tests have changed over time, we can certainly handle that and have handled that in many other states that we work with in terms of statewide implementations. If the question is more about anything over the last couple of years in terms of implementation of tests or that achievement has changed more dramatically over the past couple of years, due to other various reasons, like that is certainly something that is taken into account in these statewide models as well. And it's another reason that having the statewide data set in terms of all students in the state of Utah connected longitudinally is certainly something that's helpful. It creates a more stable pool of what that definition of state means by having all of the statewide.
I mean, we have thrown out entire years of data because of issues with the test provider. And so there are huge gaps in that data set. And I know it's separate from the data privacy issue, but I just wonder how much of that is almost I don't know. I don't want to say fool's errand, but those are, I mean, we've thrown out the entire thing. And then the philosophical issue, well, there are many, but the main one that I struggle with is there was a decision point for people entrusted with instructing other people's children as to whether or not they participated in this pilot. And part of their decision making is on the parts of the boards and the administrators and the teachers was whether or not parents wanted their data shared in this way to be used. And that was a decision point, a very deliberate, and I know because I had to go through it personally. So there are people that chose specifically not to participate in this program, partially for these types of reasons. And then here, putting on a different hat as a state board, we have to then override those decisions. And I really struggle with if we can statistically control for things like entire years where we had issues with testing companies or field tests or all those things, why are we not statistically using statistical tools to fill in the gaps of people that have, on behalf of parents, said, no, thank you, we're not, for a variety of reasons, we're not interested in participating in what is a pilot program. So but I understand, and I understand what the code says that we are to do. But to the chair's point, it's a matter of degree. And it cites the student privacy law of Utah, which tilts in the favor of parents owning the information of their children. So the last question is, why does it have to be identifiable? What is so compelling about identifiable data that we cannot de-identify it? And I know that's probably been addressed in 3 different ways, but I still don't understand why it cannot be masked. Can someone explain that? Just give me one more opportunity to understand why we can't mask this data.
David, is there anyone on your call that you would like to call on to answer that?
Yeah, I'd like to do that in 2 parts. I think, John, if you'd be willing to address it, but then John White, and then John, would you bring up a slide from the orientation that shows the value-added modeling? I'd like to just graphically show how the modeling conceptually works so that people can understand why it's necessary to have identifiable student data to track students over time, their performance, and their learning. Go ahead, John White.
Well, so there has been the consideration with this project that there may be need for individual teachers to go into a system to do roster verification, this idea of confirming the individual students that they taught throughout the year. And in order to do that, where you would log into a system and validate the individual students to have a teacher validate the individual students that they taught throughout the year with things like the percentage of instructional responsibility, having identifiable information for teachers to do so makes that obviously possible, because they would need to be able to look through lists and verify and validate that they in fact taught those students. If that was not going to be happening at all, the idea would simply be, we just at a minimum need to be able to connect students over time across the entire state to develop these models, to be able to create the value added measures. And it is possible, and we certainly have done this elsewhere, to do so with de-identifiable data. It's very important, though, that however that data is anonymized or de-identified, that it's still connected over time. So a student could have an anonymized student ID, but that ID would need to persist throughout time so that we could follow that student's data from one year to the next. However, again, we have been talking and discussing the idea of teachers going in and verifying rosters of students. To do that, they certainly would need identifiable information. And I mentioned earlier this idea that if we only wanted the LEAs that were a part of the pilot to do the roster verification portion, maybe limiting down the identifiable information to the school districts that were part of the LEAs that were part of the pilot. That certainly is a possibility. There are certainly some things to work through there in terms of, as students move across LEA lines throughout time, that we would need to have a way to, potentially add identifiable information to some of them should they move into some of the school districts later where they may be used for roster verification. But I hope that helps to clarify the identifiable nature of the request.
So before we see the chart, David, let me ask John a question. John, this is Chair Carey, and my question is this, and I'm going to ask you first, and then I'm going to have to ask our staff to see if it's even possible. But I'll start with you. What if the data we provided that was identifiable would come from the 50 or so LEAs that have voluntarily subscribed to this program? And then as part of that, to give you the longitudinal perspective that you need for each of those students in an LEA that is voluntarily enrolled in the program, we would provide that 10-year tail. So if they did attend a different school in a different part of the state, you would get that data as well for those students belonging to the LEA who have voluntarily subscribed. Would that allow, and I understand the more data, the better, but if we provided the data as I've outlined, would that allow you to run the value-added model that you are looking to construct?
So we certainly could run a value-added model with that data. The challenge becomes, if you think about looking at, let's say, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade test scores of students in Utah leading up to grade 6, to create an expectation of where we would think a student would be in grade 6 based on their prior math and reading grade 3, 4, and 5 data. It is possible that the experience of the students within those 55 LEAs is different than the average experience seen across the state of Utah as a whole. And so not having the other data from all of the other LEAs would create a different interpretation of kind of the expectation that an individual student has. It would only be based on the average experience within the pilot LEAs that the LEAs that are associated with the pilot. And so again, in the ideal world, at least, you would have, if it's, needs to be de-identified, then de-identified data from the other LEAs that were not associated with the pilot, and not only in the current year, but in previous years, so that those relationships between the test scores could be utilized when looking at a value-added model like this. And again, that would also allow you to look at kind of at the high level, the value-added measures across the entire state as a whole, and compare those against different district characteristics and school characteristics to see what those relationships would look like. Otherwise, you would be limited to doing that to or within the 55 LEAs that have submitted data. But that's, you know, that would be the challenge, to limit the data down, as you stated, Chair Kelly.
Thank you. And John, this will be my question before I turn the time over to Vice Chair Bollinger, but are you familiar with the movie Minority Report?
I believe I have seen it long ago.
When we talk, we just had a superintendent in our last segment in this committee. He referred to some of his schools as frontier schools because they are so remote. And I think he said he has 5 to 20 students, right? And I look at that and say, wow, why is that data relevant to a student who attends one of the schools in my district? And I understand the proposition that more data generally the better, but really this strikes me as a minority report with a smiley face. Like, I get it that we're trying to go in the right direction, and I think that we do need to work something out, and I hope we're able to do that. I just struggle with the notion that we get a better statistical model when we pull from these very different areas of Utah when we have a self-identified class already. But I understand you're the expert in that. But Vice Chair Bollinger, I'm sorry. We're going to go to.
Yes, would you like
I'm
us
sorry,
to
David.
just share conceptual, the value added growth model from a conceptual level? Because I think it would be helpful.
Dave, yes, let's do that. I just have to be sensitive to the time, but
Sure.
if you think it'll be helpful, we'll defer to you on this and make that part of your presentation.
We'll be quick here, but I think it'll be useful. What you've got here is a 5th grade teacher, and you can see the achievement is on the y-axis and the grade is on the x-axis. This happens to be the 5th grade teacher, and the question at hand here for this for the growth added model is based on this student number 1, based on this student's past performance academically. What would we predict the student, if all things were to remain the same and the student grew as they've grown previously, what would be the expected growth for this year? Now, that would be expected growth. And so you can see that based on that, if we actually had actual growth that exceeded that, which left the trajectory that what was anticipated, then what we would see here is value added growth, not expected growth, but value added growth. And so the more data that you have, the more useful and capable you are in predicting where that expected growth is. So then you can ascertain as to whether you've got actual growth that exceeds what was anticipated. So if you have a student, if this particular student number 1 was in Moab School District for K1 and 2, and then moved to Granite for 3, 4, and 5, a participating LEA, then you wouldn't have access to the earlier data that would help you to be as skilled in predicting that expected growth. And so hopefully that helps you. John, just another one quick, and then we want to share. Here's another example.
But wait, David.
Yeah.
But David, what if we, using your example, if they're in a participating LEA, right, that has said we want to take advantage of this pilot, what if we said yes, and we are happy to go to that school in Moab that is non-participating for that student, and we will grab that 10-year tail and provide you with that data?
So for you would be
it would be
Our staff.
Go to meetings, pull the data.
Oh, you don't mean literally go to Moab?
Oh, no. Well, in the winter, yes, but in the snow. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
This is already labor intensive
Yes.
beyond belief.
Yes, and I did speak with Director Chalice and Aaron about this ahead of time, just to make sure that, and you'll have the opportunity to address that.
Okay, but I just have some questions too.
But David, just But wouldn't that address the concern that, yes, you have the data because the LEA is participating, and for those students, we would supply you with that 10-year look-back period. And that way you do have the entire trajectory for that 10-year period for every student in a participating LEA.
Yes, that is true in terms of the actual execution of the plan, but in our understanding of where we're heading or would like to head, is that by having all student data, we'll be best positioned to select amongst those 4 models which one will best serve the state in terms of the model to be selected and used. This is to illustrate conceptually how the model would work. But again, the full universe of data would be optimal to identify the model. And then as we're talking now, the execution of the model probably wouldn't be harmed by what we're discussing now, which is reaching back to Moab and saying, can we get that student's prior data now that they're in granted a participating LEA?
Okay, thanks, David. I'm going to go to Board Member Lear.
Thanks. And I hope I can express this as succinctly as I want to. I'm looking at this a little more simplistically, and some of you might argue too simplistically, but I think the board has been given a very difficult task by the legislature and selected the school of the future to do the work, but the success of this will sort of be viewed as the board's success or failures, and yet our control is limited. And so I want to start with that we've been told we have to work with the school of the future. Our control is limited. And then thirdly, there is nothing, I was just saying to Amanda, there's nothing I can look at as a former teacher to say would be more valuable to the whole profession than knowing how much difference a good teacher makes. Stated really simply, I think that's what we're looking for. And I also understand how sacred and how important student data are. So that's not lost on me either. But if we're put in this impossible position by the legislature, I want to do, and I've got it also, to make it even more complicated, I've got to trust psychometricians. I'm not one. And I've got to trust you guys to tell us this is the best way to get this very crucial information that the legislature has told us we have to get. So I think second guessing their methodology is not what we should be doing. I think we should be saying, how can we do our job to the best extent possible of protecting student data? And because the other thing that would be terrible is to go through all of this, have some student data at risk, let's say, giving it, the worst possible characterization, and then not getting good information because we had gaps or we have too little data to make it meaningful. So if we're going to do this impossible task that we've been told we have to do, let's at least give ourselves the best possible chance to get meaningful information. And I think that will happen by trusting your methodologies, continually through Katie, impressing upon the importance of safeguarding the student data, but also not trying to make you use the methodologies of non-experts in your field. So I just think, again, maybe I'm looking at it too simplistically, but I just think it's really important for us to cooperate the way these folks want us to cooperate, but also be constantly saying we have the job of protecting data, but we also have the job of doing what the legislature has told us to do. And we have the job of trying to reach this really important point of understanding the value of teachers. So those were my thoughts and concerns, and a little different maybe than others were looking at.
Thank you, Board Member Lear. Vice Chair Bollinger.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to follow up around, and I just want to make sure I understand from the question that Vice Chair Hart had asked when you started talking about the verification process, possibly having teachers going onto a website to look at the teachers or the students that they're working with. I know in the proposal it says that they would then add in information about the total time they treat an academic subject, as well as offering information about their students' attendance. Just quickly, is that process just for the participating teachers? Or is
Yes.
that for all of the teachers across the state of Utah?
And is that a question for the center?
Yes, that's for the center.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. So yes, the roster verification process, if you're going to ascribe learning to a teacher, they'll receive a link which they'll respond to. They'll go in and verify that these are the kids that I'm serving. And that also allows, for example, if the elementary ed teacher says, yeah, I'm serving Johnny, that also allows for the special education teacher to indicate, I'm also serving Johnny in the area of English language arts. I'm spending this much time with him during the week. And the regular ed teacher expresses how much time they're spending, so that you can start to try to make sure the kids are associated with the teachers that are teaching them, but also the amount of time that they're teaching them, so that you can ascribe the proper amount of learning to the individual people that touch that kid. The attendance data is also important because it allows us to know whether the student is not only being taught by the teacher, but the amount of, not the amount of time, but how frequently they're coming in contact with it in terms of their attendance.
Chair, if I may just have one follow-up
again,
question.
only those LEAs that are participating will complete that portion. Yes.
Thank you, David. Okay, and this question may be for our staff as well. I understand the need to, when we're comparing maybe these participating schools, right? When it says like the top 5% of teachers get a certain stipend, the ones 6 to 10%, I understand the need maybe to compare the participating LEAs and eligible teachers with the whole state of Utah, right? Just to make sure that those really are the highest scores. I'm curious to know if, going back to or adding on to Chair Carey's idea of giving past data for participating students, but could we adjust where we just provide information as far as ranges of all of the data that they have, the ranges for teachers, saying, okay, the top 5% of teachers had these scores in growth, and the top 6 to 10% this would be their range. So basically then the center could compare what they're looking at to see if they fit, how they would compare into all of the teachers of the state of Utah without having to give identifiable information about individual students and teachers. Is that even possible?
Aaron Bruff, Director of Data and Statistics. That's a lot of extra work, what you just described. Is it possible? Absolutely. It's a lot of extra work and a lot of additional computations that have to be done. So there's the answer to that question. And I do have a question or a comment if you guys will allow me later, but there's the answer is it doable? There'll be a lot of extra additional work instead of just sharing the full data set.
So let me, any other questions for, Director Chalice, let me ask you this. And I don't want to put you on the spot, but have we proffered other possibilities for this project to move forward other than turning over all identifiable student data to the School of the Future?
I would say no. So our conversation, my conversations with the Center for School of the Future have been mostly, I've said, oh, I'm, a little bit worried about this. And they've said, we really feel strongly we need this scope of data. And to my memory, I don't know that we've explored much of a middle ground. And Chair, I'd be happy to do that between now and next month, if you'd like. That's one of the thoughts that has come to me throughout this committee meeting, is that perhaps we could return I could return to that group and we could discuss some of the just options that have been brought forward here.
So, David, did you hear that?
I did.
Do you think that would be efficacious to take, you know, the time to see if there is a middle ground that could be reached between our charge to protect, you know, the student data and, you know, your need to move forward? Do you think it's worth doing that?
I do. I think it would be fine for us to try to work together. We want to recognize that that there are timelines in terms of this pilot. We would prefer, obviously, to make sure that we're meeting those timelines so that this very challenging program and LEAs are waiting for information from us. But if we need to let them know this is going to take longer, it does. There are some downstream complications to all of that, and we can certainly work through that. In the end, it sounds like what we're, if I can comment further, it sounds like what we're valuing up is the need for data security while we're to ensure that we're managing that interest, while at the same time we're trying to run a project that would allow for the best data that could be used. And so there's competing interests there. Student data, obviously, we would hope in the state to, just as a representative of our IHE, but also as a taxpayer, that the data would be used to good effect. And we particularly believe that as a center that this data will be used to good effect. And anyway, the short of it is we would be willing to do that. It creates some other sorts of challenges downstream for us and for LEAs that are participating and for the contractors, but we'll certainly be willing to do that. So that would mean, just so that we could be clear, that if that were to occur, this would come back to law and licensing in February, which if it were approved at that point, it would push it out to full board approval in March. Is that correct?
Well, you know, David, in light of your willingness to collaborate, and I am grateful for that, and I know the committee is because it allows us to meet our dual charges, right? Protect the data and collaborate. So what I would recommend, and again, this has to be approved by the full board, but I would recommend, Director Chalice, if we gave you 2 weeks to collaborate with schools, instead of waiting the full month, which pushes them into March, if we as a committee said in 2 weeks, can you work out a compromise, would that be enough time for you and your team to work with School of the Future?
Yes, definitely. I would just want confirmation that Center of School of the Future that would work for them too. But from our end, I'm certain we could make that work.
David, is 2 weeks enough for you to work with Director Chalice and her team to see if there's middle ground?
Yes, I think that would be fine.
I'm ready to make a motion, but I want to ask a question relative to this first, if that's okay.
Yeah, let me just ask this. So if we had 2 weeks, you could report back just via email to the committee on the status of that? Okay.
And
yeah.
Because it relates directly to this,
Sure.
your
Go ahead,
questions.
Board member.
I would that kind of, in your mind right now, I know it's not been finalized or worked out in detail, but in your mind, as an expert, does that compromise the work you're doing too much? And again, we don't know exactly what the compromise will be, so I know that's kind of a speculative question. But I'm concerned that in the name of data protection, we watered this down so much that it's not useful to anyone, and it still puts data at risk. Do you think you can do both? Is a compromise possible without really making your work less effective?
Well,
and I know, again, speculation.
Member Lear, I think based on what we've heard from John White, but also our own perception of this, that any sort of compromise will compromise the result of what we're doing. And so that doesn't mean that we can't compromise, but there's always some loss of some capability with compromise, because we do believe that and has been expressed multiple times today, that having the full data would best position us to add value to the educational institution in Utah, and specifically to this area. So we're willing to compromise, but recognize that compromise would likely require that the system not be as capable as it might have been. But we're certainly willing to do that.
But then I'm still ready to make a motion if that's okay. And would you put it up there? Because I say I'm ready to make a motion, but then I'm relying on the staff to tell me the motion to make. And I should go to I could just go to the. Oh, are you Ben or Vanessa? Okay, just enable me here, Vanessa. I could do it on my own computer too. I got it in front of me. That's okay. I should have just started there. I move that the committee approve the interagency data sharing agreement with Utah State University's Center for School of the Future. And I'm not going to read that number, and forward to the board for approval. I don't know if we need to add all the stuff about working on a compromise. In the meantime, doing what's possible, and we'll hear from Katie what the possibilities were and are, and move forward with that discussion.
So Board Member Lear, I just want to make sure I understand. You're saying that they can still discuss in the 2 weeks.
Sure.
If something's possible, they work it out. If not, it's still
Then
moving
we
forward.
go forward. That's
Okay.
what I'm saying.
Thank you. Would anyone like to speak to that motion?
I would just like to say, as it's written, I'm a little concerned, but if there's going to be some work in between to find a middle ground that can still help them achieve the goals and the intent of the law, as well as trying to keep data as private as possible, then I would be open to moving it forward.
Yeah, and I'm just going to, one, I want to thank Aaron and Director Chalice. I know that you have worked very hard on this. And I want to thank School of the Future too. I've only heard good things about you from the staff. And I know that whatever happens, everyone will watch out for the student data. I am going to vote against this motion, hoping that in 2 weeks when we hear from Director Chalice, something comes forward that I could support. But again, I'm very grateful for the willingness of both of you to work on this hopeful resolution. Anyone else want to speak for or against this? Okay.
Can I just speak to my motion for
Yes.
2 sentences? I recognize this is a difficult position. It's not something, if I think many board members and board staff would have preferred if this assignment had stayed in-house with the ability to consult, then we wouldn't have the FERPA issues. On the other hand, the legislature in its wisdom saw that the School of the Future would be the best expert to work with. So I personally want to do everything possible to get some good information. I can't think of anything more crucial than knowing how teachers do their job better for our students. So I think that excellent results usually entail some risk on both parties' part. So yes, I welcome a discussion about compromise, but in the end, I will defer to the School of the Future. So I'm hoping that we can come to a better consensus about meeting these 2 difficult requirements. So with that, yes, that's the motion.
Okay, let's vote. Because it doesn't look like it'll be unanimous, let's just do a roll call vote. Board Member Lear?
Yes.
Board Member Bollinger? Vice Chair Hart? Okay. Board Member Hall?
I'm going to be a no on this.
Okay. Can you draw out that answer a little bit? She needs a full minute to. Vice Chair Hart.
I just guess I'd feel a little bit more comfortable. Yes, my vote is yes. I just really have serious concerns about, I understand what we're trying to do. I understand value added models. I understand that we need to recognize good teachers. I understand that we are in the pursuit of excellence. I think there are a million ways we can get to what excellent teaching looks like. I'm just very, very torn about how we position ourselves in the state about personally identifiable information and who owns that about students, and making a decision about participation in something and then turning around and saying you're basically participating anyway. And then the fact that we turn our nose at 99 million other ways to identify excellent teaching, and we don't necessarily listen to our practitioners who can tell us so much more than a value-added model can, using data that is often problematic at best. I understand the requirements. I understand what we need to do. I have, as a professional, and as a person that understands a tiny bit about research. I have reservations, but at the end of the day, my answer is yes.
Thank you. That passes 3-2, and the motion that the committee approve the interagency data sharing agreement with Utah State University Center for School of the Future, USBE 25001-8I, AA, and forward to the board for approval. That motion is passed 3-2. David, John, thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aaron, you said you had. Okay, I want to thank the committee for that. I know that took a while, but I thought it was important given the breadth. Director Chalice, you are also with us for our next one, 2.4 Board Policy 3006, Data Governance Plan. And Ben, are you queuing that up for us, or is that Director Chalice? Okay.
Thanks, committee. Katie Chalice, Director of Privacy. So this item has been back and forth in committee a few times. And so the draft 2 reflects some changes that that staff made, Ben and I made, in response to committee discussion when it was last heard. So those changes should be reflected in the draft. I will also note that I believe Member Lear sent some non-substantive changes, so we're intending to address those. And
Anything other than grab.
just technical, yeah. Okay, great. And then I'll also just add for the committee, for your awareness, that you have, whether you know it or not, an advisory group called the Student Data Protection Advisory Group. And I lead that group. And we met the other day and they voted to recommend that the committee approve draft 2 with some slight language changes, which Ben and I already made that were non-substantive. And they noted that they recommend that the board keep the over-the-shoulder data disclosure capability limited in scope and use. And I believe that concludes my summary, unless you have any questions for me.
Any questions? We'll just give the committee a minute to.
You don't have a draft, you do a draft.
Yeah, there is a draft too.
Oh, yes.
What non-substantive changes did the committee recommend? I'm just out of curiosity. What did they see? And
Yeah.
it looks like board member Lear's ready with a question. So, do you know? Oh, okay.
I've got them all written down right here. Data is a plural. And you can't keep.
That's not what he's asking. He's asking about the recommendations the committee made, right?
Yeah, because I just no, because I read your email. Yeah, I saw that. I just wanted to know what the committee.
So if you look online, starting on line 191, they wanted us to reorganize that a little bit more so it was a little more clear without changing the substance of it, just to kind of rearrange the numbering a bit so it was flowed a little better.
Okay.
Chair, they also asked for some clarifying language. In many instances in the policy, it provides clarity about who approves certain types of requests. And they asked that we change may review or may approve to may review or shall review and may approve for some clarity there. So that's reflected multiple times throughout the policy.
Yeah,
I thought so too.
Good for them. That's fantastic. That is really well done. Any questions from the committee? If not, we're ready for a motion. Vice Chair Bollinger?
Chair, I would recommend that the committee move forward the motion to approve Board Policy 3006 Data Governance Plan Draft 2 and for the recommendation of the board.
The motion before the committee is that the committee approve Board Policy 3006 Data Governance Plan Draft 2 and forward the recommendation to the board. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you, Director Chalice. The next item is Board Policy 2002, Board Officer Elections Procedures. As this is my application to the committee, I felt it best that I relinquish the chair just to avoid the appearance of favoritism. And I have asked Vice Chair Bollinger to act as chair during this discussion.
Thank you, Chair. So the discussion topic, as Chair Carey had said, is Board Policy 2002, Board Officer Election Procedures. Chair Carey, as this is a recommendation that's coming from you as part of a group of 3, is this something you would like to start off by speaking to?
Yes, thank you. And I want to also thank Director Rasmussen for his help in drafting this. The 2 big provisions that you'll see before you are 1, striking the language regarding ranked choice voting. So our leadership elections will be the traditional 1 person, 1 vote. And the secondary change I made was, and do you have that? What was the?
And you might want to point out that we're on draft 2 is the recommended draft. That says 1 on the screen, but it's just in paragraph 2E, and it's just to make clear that the board secretary will announce the specifics of who voted for who at the time of the election results are announced.
Thank you. And so we've done this 2 different ways, I believe, since I've been on the board. One time it was the members voted and that was public. And the second time we just released the tally of the total votes received. This one would say the actual results of the vote would be disclosed. That's basically the proposed rule or policy change.
Okay, does anybody have discussion?
I just have.
Okay, Member Lear.
Well, I have two questions at least, but who are the other two people that were joining you and it maybe was in this material I didn't see?
Christina Bogus and Emily Green.
And can you tell me the impetus for going back to this? Because I think I remember before we did this ranked choice process. And it was a little tricky to process and figure out. But I think it's worked out well. Of course, I would think so because it gives the minority more of a voice. But I'd like to know what your impetus is.
I think it was just, I like the simplicity of the straightforward vote. And I also think there's less opportunity to do horse trading in that vote for me in this round, the second round, if you don't make it, I'll get this vote. And I think by eliminating that, not only do you simplify the process, but I think you also eliminate that type of horse trading.
Okay.
Did you have a follow-up question?
Those are my two questions. I wanted to know who the members were, and then also that. I do have a follow-up, maybe comment. I won't be supporting this again for the obvious reasons. I think it was a little challenging to understand and become involved in, but I definitely feel like it gave, and it's tricky with a small group. I think I at first thought that it would work better with a larger group, and then of course I saw the value of it, of being able to have some input as a more minority part of the board. I'm resisting talking about political or minorities and majorities on this board. So I'll say that to begin with, but knowing that I have more of a minority voice, I appreciated that there were ways that we could have our voice heard, and that we could also, that all board members could express a first choice and a second choice, and not just, if my first choice is out the window, then I'm left with whatever happens. So I'll be objecting to this, not voting for it. But I kind of was just anticipating that somebody would bring this forward. So I'm interested in the rapidity with which it came forward. So we'll see how it goes.
Hey,
Thank you.
Vice Chair Hart.
So in looking at why you would do ranked choice voting, a large part of it is avoiding having runoffs and having the costs of additional elections. When you have a group of 15, and you do rounds and you're in one place and you're able to do that, it negates because if you're doing rounds, you do get an additional voice because you get another vote. So I don't see the advantages of ranked choice in a small environment where you can do a second round, because you do your second round. So I don't mind the change. In fact, I think it does simplify, because you no longer have to explain all of the nuances of ranked choice. I am going to, after we discuss this issue, I just want to make a amendment. I'm just going to let committee know. I know this is not how we generally do it, but it talks in E2E, the vice chair shall announce the voice tallies and individual votes immediately following each vote. I don't think that current sitting officers should be involved in the elections of future board I'm really struggling with words this morning. I have a bit of a headache. I
Leadership.
apologize. Of leadership. Thank you. So would you like that amendment now?
Would you
or-
like to make a motion? for the
Yeah, I'd
amendment?
like to make a motion that on, this doesn't have line numbers, so
So it'd be section 2E.
2E, yeah. Director Rasmussen, are you Vanessa? You've got the screen? Okay. And I'm asking the committee for a word choice here. It's whoever we have running it, which we had Director Rasmussen, board secretary, and
Board staff.
board staff.
That may be uncomfortable for Sybil to be.
Yes,
in the middle of that.
I like the idea. I just, being of the previous leadership and then being a candidate, I don't want that to say, and if we're going to be specific, I don't think if it stays and we, if it stayed in there and we said we were going to have somebody else do it, I don't think anybody would object. But in the spirit of being accurate, I think that we should consider a different choice there. Can I speak one more piece, Vice Chair?
Yes, please.
I also think that we should use the tools we have, and everybody's votes would be apparent immediately. I think we should use the system we have for voting and not use little slips of paper or little ballots. And then that means that everybody's votes would be obvious, just like in the same format that we do any other vote. And the only challenge there is that we would have to program the mics, so the names, but we can do that with just a couple days of lead time. And so I am also interested in what that change would look like, but I didn't have the foresight to come up with an actual motion for that. So can we work on this motion while maybe Director Rasmussen, I see that you're already kind of thinking about what that would require. I just don't want to, I want to say that we're going to use the voting system, which would negate the need for the.
But Vice Chair, may I?
Yes, please.
So what happens, because if we vote remotely, like, because then we wouldn't be able to use the system. So that would be my only.
Yeah, that's a good.
Ben, can you address that?
I was just going to say the website that we used this last time, we could do the same thing on, which is basically free to the board, and we could show the results instantaneously.
Okay.
We could do the same thing with this. I'm not sure, they can reprogram this to do names. You could do that too. But I think there's a number of ways that you could do that electronically and allow people to participate remotely.
Do you see any changes that we would need to make in the language of this board policy to say that? When I read this, I feel like we're writing on little slips of paper and then we're counting them. And I feel like that moves us backwards.
So I think you would amend paragraph, so just disappeared from me. You would amend paragraph.
Would that be 2B?
2B, yeah, where it says the board secretary shall distribute ballots. I mean, I think you could change that to the board secretary. I mean, I think you can just change that to the board will vote electronically. I mean, that would probably be it. The board shall vote electronically. Well, you don't even have to identify the system. I think if you just say the board shall vote electronically, that would cover this, or that would cover using what we did last time, or any other system the board chooses to use.
Okay, I'm going to pause this for just a second. Vice Chair Hart, would you like to change your motion to include both parts, or would you like to address the first motion and then add another motion?
I feel like I would like to change the motion to include that so that I can have both pieces, because I feel like I'm getting the vibe that maybe that would be okay and we could move on without doing a whole bunch of motions.
Okay.
So I think I've got your motion up here. Just give me a second to reformat it.
Okay.
Yeah, Vice Chair Hart, let's just make sure that what is written on the board is what you would like us to be voting on.
So it would just be a two-part motion.
Yes, that is the motion I'd like to make.
Okay. So the motion on the board is to amend section 2E to replace vice chair with board staff. And part 2 is amend 2B to read the board shall vote electronically. Is there any discussion to that motion?
I don't know at what point we divide the motion because those things are, I'm fine with, not fine about I'm not fine about changing from ranked choice.
Okay, so
and I don't know if they're two
okay,
or
yes. So right now
inevitably linked.
we're just voting on just this motion to make just these amendments, so not on the full motion. So is there any, are we okay with these changes? Does anybody have any other discussion? Okay, seeing as there's none, let's just go ahead. All of those in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
All right, that is unanimous. Thank you. Okay, now let's go back to our original motion that the committee approved board policy 2002. One question.
Someone still needs to make that motion, by the way.
Okay. So nobody has made the motion yet.
Correct.
Okay. So let me just ask one question, Chair Carey. With the part that was added in and individual votes, I'm just wondering if you could just speak to that change and the thought behind that change as well.
Yeah, I just think that information is available now. We just make the public go through another step to get it. And I just thought, why do that? It's not like audit committee stuff. We don't do that all the time, making it public. With this, we do. Again, it's just you'd have to gram it, and for purposes of streamlining it and transparency, I said, let's just make it part of the process and put it there.
Okay, so are you ready to make a motion?
I can.
Or is there somebody else that would like to make the motion? Okay.
Make the motion that the committee approve board policy 2002, board officer election procedures draft 2 as amended, and forward the recommendation to the board.
Okay, thank you. Member Hall, is there any further discussion?
I would just say I would agree with Member Hart and Vice Chair Hart and Chair Carey. I would agree with them too. A lot of theatrics involved in the way that we voted with the choice rank voting. I think maybe in a larger group that works well, but I think in a smaller group like this, it just did seem like there was a lot of theatrics going on behind the scenes. So I would agree with them on this and definitely support this motion.
Okay, thank you. And I would just add to this that because it is something that does impact all board members, I do believe it's something that warrants going to the full board. So I would be in support of this as well. So any other discussion? Okay, seeing that we may have not a unanimous, let's go ahead and do an individual roll call for this vote. Member Lear? No. Member Hall?
Yes.
Chair Carey?
Yes.
Member Hart?
Yes.
And I am a yes. So that passes 4-1. And I will turn the time back to Chair Carey.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bollinger. I know we're pressed for time. Does the committee want to take just a short break? 5
Chair
minutes?
Carey, can I speak to something before we take a break? I just want to, and I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but I want to provide context to my no vote on the futures of the schools. What's the name of the group again? Yes.
Let me just say this, because that matter is closed.
Yes.
Is there any objection from the committee? No.
I just wanted to give context to my no vote. I'm sorry, brand new, a little bit nervous, but I wanted to express that we're stewards of our children's data, and that it wasn't that I don't want to merit-based pay for teachers. I love teachers. I want to see them celebrated and encouraged and rewarded. This had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with the data. So I feel like if there's a compromise that can be made as we move forward when it comes to the data of our young people, I'm willing to look and see what the board comes up with.
Okay, thank you. And with that, let's just take a short 5-minute break, and then we'll come back at 11:10. Thank you. Okay, committee, if we can circle back up. So So this is agenda item 2.6 R277609, standards for LEA discipline plans and emergency safety interventions. And Deputy Superintendent Nui, we have you as lead on this.
Sorry, I am doing double duty and sharing my screen as well. Okay. So R277609, oh, I apologize. Elise Nui, Deputy Superintendent of Policy. R277609 has appeared before this committee in the past, I believe in November and December. For those of you that are new or listening online, this is a rule that oversees LEA's discipline policies. So this dictates what needs to be in their policies, what is required as minimum guidelines for those policies. I will then trying to bring it up for you all. I apologize. Yes, let me look and see. So this rule has gone through a few different drafts. The first draft was one put together by staff based on recommendations and work from a lot of members of our field, behavior specialists and LEAs, superintendents, legal counsel and LEAs, as well as just general best practices. Those changes were recommended in November. We received additional feedback from some other LEA representatives, including council, to make some changes. Those changes are reflected in draft 2. And then draft 3 has some changes that were requested by board members from this committee. So I believe we can work from draft 3. Oh, shoot, I apologize. Very good. I so apologize, but yeah, please do.
All right. Oh.
So I think that's it from me. If there's anything that staff wants to add, or we can just jump right into the discussion.
Staff, anything to add before we?
Yeah, Becca Ray, Prevention and Behavior Support Specialist. Some additional context that I'd like to give you. A discussion we would like to have is regarding the category of monitoring for this rule. So there's been some discussion in the past. The EARS program is where LEAs were submitting their discipline policies. When that program was repealed, we were no longer receiving those policies. And there was some discussion that the board would still like to be receiving those and monitoring. So about probably a year and a half ago, we were requested to begin a monitoring process for this rule. And that's kind of where all of these changes started. So in reviewing the rule, there was a lot of feedback coming from the field that I think a word that was used a few times was the rule had become unwieldy. There was so much content that had been added over years, and it was very difficult for them to comply with. And so when doing kind of a test review, we found it was very difficult for our LEAs to follow. So in order to create a monitoring process, most of these changes, you'll see a lot of movement. Things have just been shifted around, but maybe content has stayed the same. And so that is just to ease the monitoring process, make it easier for our LEAs to follow. But then that's also a discussion that we would like to have with you today. And then in addition to that, the opportunity to amend this rule came from the legislative changes last year with HB 84, 347, and 14. And so that is what opened it up to allow us to make these changes.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Vice Chair Hart?
Yeah. So when you say monitoring, what do you, in oversight category, what do we what did we change it to?
So in this draft, we set it at a category 2. That's how that reflects what is currently happening. But that is a discussion for this body to decide if we would like to move it up or.
Well, I guess my question, and I don't know if you if you took the wonderful opportunity watching the entire board meeting yesterday, but there was a time at which we talked about data that we collect here at USBE. That is what I call graveyard data. It just comes here to die, and it's not really being used. When you get the data, why are you asking for the data, and what are you doing with it? Does that make sense? If we're going to ask LEAs to turn in information, then I think we need to be able to clearly say what we're doing with the data. So what do you do with the data?
So that's actually a question that we would like to discuss with you all, is what you would like done with that data. This rule encompasses so much. So it covers bullying, gang prevention, substance use, and it's kind of a catch-all rule. And so data that would be coming from this monitoring could be information on how many students are being exclusionary practices are being used, and are there significant amounts in some LEAs because maybe they're not utilizing alternatives to suspension and expulsion, and maybe we could provide technical assistance. But it's really up to the board to decide what they would like done with that information.
And so how are you asking us to consider reports? Are you asking us to consider putting this info? Because I'll tell you, when I put on my other hat, the monitoring of this is horrifying. Like how I would even begin to report this out, and the different data sources that it would come from, and the processes, and so my question now as a board member is, what are you trying to, are you looking for compliance, or are you looking for information for, are you looking for compliance, or are you looking for usage data so that you can use the data for some other purpose? I don't know. Excuse me, if that makes any sense.
I just want to address part of that question. One of the questions that we get asked as staff a lot, like for example, with ESI, for example, emergency safety interventions, that's really important. And I think we're all on the same page about that being important, that it's used correctly, that it's used well. But when people come to us and ask us questions, including board members, about, well, how is this being used? How often is it being used? That's the kind of thing we're saying, well, we just won't have that data if we're not monitoring. And so if that's okay, right, we're just balancing like we always do. Is the data worth it to have the kind of answers, or to be able to ask the kinds of questions that we want to ask? And so that's kind of the discussion that I think we're looking for, is what things are important to this board that we're collecting, and how would we like that to be done in relation to this rule?
Thank you.
And Chair, may I add?
Please.
Yeah, and additionally, there's been some discussion on what this would look like. Would this just be, like you said, compliance? Would we just be reviewing their policies and proof of the implementation of those? Or are we reviewing actual implementation? And so it's really a discussion for you all to have, what you would like that to look like.
Is the proposal that we have that discussion now in real time, or are you saying it needs to be had? Does that make sense? I just don't know if that discussion can take place otherwise the real chair, Chair Hymas, the trains run on time. So I've got
So wouldn't it, so our shortcut language for that is the oversight category. correct? So it's whether or not we want to leave it at a category 2 or whether or not we want to move it to a category 3. I think would be how we would, that, you know, whether we're going to move it forward with one or the other. In answering that question, which I hate not answering the question and giving you an answer and sending you back with other instructions or whatever, but to me, half of the answer lies in what data do you already have that we already report up? And so if there's a place that that data already goes, like pieces of it, then it doesn't need to be re-collected in this. And so the answer is going to be it depends, because quite personally, I'm going to want to know what's already in Utrex. What do I already put in as a requirement in my discipline system? And so the answer is not going to be able to be answered here, because for me personally, I'm going to ask what other data elements do I already send up? And if I already send them up, I'm not going to do it here too, because it's already, you know what I'm, so to me, it's going to be it depends. And in order to answer the question, I'm going to give you a list of questions that I need answers to in order to answer the question. So I feel, I don't know, I'm a little conflicted.
Vice Chair Bollinger?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Vice Chair Hart was saying is, I mean, when I read this and look at it, is the purpose of having, you said it does encompass quite a bit, and just say you have to have reports of all of these things. Is the purpose then as an LEA, I can go to this and say, okay, these are all my reporting pieces, because they are also identified in other board rules. That would be my question too, is this just kind of to streamline it? So if I'm an LEA, I can go to one place and say, okay, how is my system reporting all of these things having to do with behavior?
Yes, and that was the intention in amending this rule, was to really streamline and clean it up. It should be a one-stop shop for anything discipline related. You should be able to come to 609 and find a reference that will direct you, whether it's to code, another rule, etc.
I do have a question along the lines of what Vice Chair Hart was saying, which is, so the rule is currently a category 2. If the committee decided and then the full board decides it should be a 3, what does that look like in terms of demands on staff, the needs of staff, cost? And I guess it's a circular argument, because you would need to know from us what we're sending you. But since you asked us that question, we'll ask you. Right, it's
like you said, a bit of a circular question in that we would need to know what we are going to be monitoring. However, this is something that has been brought up and expressed concern of, because it would be a heavy lift for staff monitoring all LEA discipline policies. And if we are going as far as implementation of that, I mean, we may be looking at site visits. And so what does that look like as well? And so it really just depends on what degree of monitoring we're going to be doing, what the staff lift would be.
And Tanya, we saw you come up to the table, so please.
Thank you, Chair. If I may add just a little bit, I'm Tanya Albornoz, I'm the prevention coordinator. I just want to provide like a real-time example of what happens with staff. We're asked often, how many LEAs have bullying policies that are in compliance with the law, and who's in compliance with their bullying policies? We're not able to answer that question because we don't collect those policies right now. We're not able to tell them how many LEAs comply with the policies they have because we don't monitor that. So that's an example, and it happens in every single arena. Suicide prevention, substance use prevention, all the things encompassed in this rule. So I just wanted to put that out there for your consideration. How we do the monitoring, at what level we do the monitoring, those are all things we can talk about. But in order for us to be able to answer those questions, we need to have some kind of mechanism to gather that.
And I know the Vice Chair Hart, I interrupted her.
I'm
sorry.
On the list somewhere.
Do you want to?
Yeah.
Let's go to Vice Chair Hart and then Board Member Lear.
So first of all, the last place that I intersected with this rule was, and I tell all my business, was an OCR complaint. And so once it came through the hotline and then it came to me as a director, they asked for a list of things, including bullying policy and all this. And it took considerable time, and I fully comply. That is, the question is, I'm not saying I shouldn't have to do that. In fact, I should have to do that. But you're exactly right. It was after something happened. It was not preventative. You didn't have access to that information. So I understand very much the problem. And before we go any further, you did a fabulous job cleaning up, clearing up, like you cleared out the brush, so to speak, so that we don't have brush fires, right? So step one, check. But now we do need to identify, and it is the proper role of the board to identify what data elements we collect and how we collect them and how you monitor them. So I'm 100% with you. The devil is just in the details, and I'm trying to do, the thinking out loud in the committee work and trying to answer the question. So thank you so far. I think that this has the possibility of being a real game changer in that area of data collection and the things that I perseverate on, which include overlapping reporting and, that whole stuff that ends up in a conversation devolving into one SIS, but that's a whole nother story. But I think it's going to take longer than a committee. So I guess the question to the committee and to our staff is, does this require maybe even a small group or a short brief task force because I don't think it can be done in committee, but I think it's absolutely critical that the work is done. So as we try to solve this and unravel this, what I don't want is I only have 4 years, and we need to not drag this out, and it could take years to get right if we don't dedicate some time to it. So I think we should consider a working group or a task force, because this here is what our practitioners are talking about and our staff is stymied by. They can't do their work if they don't have the data. We can't do our work if we're constantly sharing data that's repetitive, but at the same time isn't even the data they need. So I think we need the fact that they asked us, what do you want to do in this space, is really a move forward. And we need to hear that they're asking us, but we also need to hear that it's our responsibility. So I don't know what you want to do with that.
Vice Chair Harder, is your suggestion that the working group is constituted of members of this committee, or are you saying board leadership should put a working group together?
That's you. I'm just spewing.
Then let's circle back to that. I just have one other question to help me better understand the answer to what you're asking. And that is, from your perspective, in order to do the job that you have been given here at USBE, would that be more appropriately done if you had the capacities and capabilities associated with a level 3 or keeping it at a level 2? Because to me, that's really the answer, right? In order to do your job the best, do you need more capacity and capability than what we've given you as a category 2? Does that make sense?
I think I'm following. Something that we have discussed is if we do move this to a category 3, there are additional resources that would be needed for us as staff, just because of the level of involvement that it
Three
would
would
take.
be less than 2. 3 would be less.
3 is more intensive.
I was thinking of that backwards.
And then I'm going to turn the time over to Board Member Lear.
Ah, that's interesting. Yeah, I was thinking of that. So,
Oh, I thought me turning the time over was interesting. And I was like, wait, I think you have your light on. Oh, well,
but
it's only my first day. Give me
Yeah,
some time.
I'll give you a break. Yeah, here, I have several thoughts and a little jumbled, but first of all, I agree. This is a big improvement from, and just to put things in context, I was on a working group in 2016 when we first tried to make sense of bullying at the time rule, and it ended up being way too tedious. And this is and also things have evolved, and this is a great improvement. So that's kind of one thought. I think we can still do some maybe clearer work when it says the section that says LEA reporting on in 7. I think it'd be clearer if we said LEA shall provide A, B, C, D, E, and maybe even a time frame or a timeline by June 30th of each year. Anyway, I think that might help in terms of what Molly was talking about. Is this available? Do I do this in other places or in other ways, or is this it? So that's one thought I had. Secondly, I think, and your comment was timely, because what real monitoring on this, in my mind, would be, we've got 160 LEAs. It would be literally pulling every single, first of all, nagging every LEA to have a rule that looks something that's called a bullying rule or a discipline rule or whatever. And then thirdly, you'd have to go through it and say, no, incomplete here, inaccurate here, not good enough here, and then have that back and forth. And as I was just talking to Amanda about something previously, the 12 LEAs that are very sophisticated and have legal staff and 3 of you on their staffs, they would be doing what they're supposed to, and then you would be nagging all the very small LEAs and getting the right information in. I've just, this is reality based.
The reality is most of us little ones follow instructions and the big ones say, we don't.
Well, and I've actually talked to people in bigger LEAs who say, this is one I'm ignoring, but that involves, so, but it literally, the work is still the same, whatever their attitudes are in various sizes and shapes. You would have to look through all of those, and then there would be changes either in the law or in the rule, and you would be starting all over again. So do we want to be aspirational in this, or do we want to be realistic? Is one of my questions. It's a rhetorical question, or to be answered later, because I do think that is a real dilemma. Is if you really want to do it to a level 3, now I'm kind of thinking not backwards, a level 3, it would involve constant work on your part. So that's my second point. My third point is I see real value in this. I saw real value in this 8 or 9 years ago, because if we had reporting, and I want to talk about a caveat to reporting in a second, but if we had reporting of incidents of bullying, we could say, oh my gosh, we could show one of those neat charts that say, look how we've increased. We could say, no, we need to have better training here. We need to have X school district work with Y charter school and see what they're doing better, because there's 5 times the amount of incidents in this LEA than this LEA. So, I can see some really valuable use for this if we're looking for money to improve these issues in our schools, which we know, as much as we hate to say it, that these kinds of issues are central, probably as important as math content in what happens in schools. And so having that ability to actually have some knowledge and data about bullying incidents and all other kinds of incidents, safety incidents in this would be really valuable in a practical way. So that third point, bringing me to my last point, and I don't want to sound too negative, but this is first of all, I think we need clear definitions of exactly what should be reported. If there's a fight, starting with a bully, do you report 5 incidents because 5 children were involved, or do you report 1 incident because it was a fight? Is it gang related because there was 1 gang member, or anyway? So I think, and then second part of that is it's really hard to get LEAs to report this because it doesn't reflect well on them. And so you do get some LEAs that are gigantic who report 2 incidents, and you get smaller LEAs, more rule followers, who are reporting every single little disturbance that happens. So that's another concern. So I do support having now expressed my concerns about all of this and some reality-based concerns. I think a task force or a working group or something would be super helpful to give the staff more direction, and maybe also to help revise this just a little bit so exactly what has to be reported is laid out in an A, B, C, D, and maybe with a timeline. Sorry, thanks for that, letting me make that lengthy comment.
Deputy Superintendent Nui, you had your light on it, but you took it off. I didn't know if you still wanted to comment.
I just wanted to clarify a couple things, if that's okay. There's been a lot of discussion about what is already being required. So just to let you know, so that subsection that was mentioned is subsection 7, LEA reporting. We went through and took out everything that was no longer required. So there was a lot of things in there that existed in other places. And so right now, all it says is that the LEA shall develop a consistent process to collect incident, infraction, and discipline data, including the number of days of student suspension and expulsion, and then report that to the state, according to our UTREX laws or our rules and other data collection rules that we have here at USBE. So that's where it stands right now. And that is why it's reflected as a level 2, is because there's, we don't actively go in and ask for other data. So my recommendation just for process would probably be, if the board wanted to go in a direction of a working group, is to pass this version out as a level 2 with these requirements, and then work from there with a smaller group or however you wanted to do that.
Please, Vice Chair Hart.
I don't know how to indicate I have an idea.
Well, waving your hands
Without-
like that is a good
Yes,
start.
but I also hit the button, which meant I had permission to talk, which I didn't. So I would like to start here. In the interest of time, I'd like to make a motion if you don't mind. I'm fully expecting there to be comments. I just wanted to have something to start with. I move that we, oh shoot, now that I say that, do the regular motion, which you're going to pull up, that the committee approve R277609 standards for LEA discipline plans and emergency safety interventions draft 2 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second final reading, and that we refer this rule to the reports and requirements task force for further defining of data elements and their sources. Somebody make that prettier. I just think we have a reports and requirements task force. They're working on some things. It's a cross section of small LEAs, large LEAs, charters, I apologize, Dr. Nye, I don't know what your title is at this point. Governor's office, Dr. Nye, and various stakeholders, USBA. We've got a cross section of people. The task force is already there. It's got board members on it. We can invite staff. It's got staff on it. And it gives us a place to figure out a starting place to get this work done in something less than multiple years.
Oh yeah, I forgot to add 2 to 6 months previous time.
Yeah. This could drag out. We don't need this to take. No, if we refer it, I mean, we've got a meeting Monday, so. Now this wouldn't obviously be on the agenda Monday because this needs to go to the full board, but I'm just saying it meets regularly. So it isn't something that we would have to spend a lot of time on the front end convening. So there's my motion. Tear it apart.
Anyone like to speak to the motion? Let's start with
I
board
support
member.
it. I support that motion.
Okay, Vice Chair Bollinger.
I also support the motion, and part of that is, even though this may need some additional adjustments, safety is such a top priority in our state. I think that the way that this has been streamlined has really given guidance to districts to put some systems and processes in place that really focus on prevention, which is one of the number one things we can do to help prevent incidents that we don't want to have happen. So I would support this motion.
Any other one wishing to speak? Deputy Superintendent Nui.
Can I just make a clarification on the motion? So right now I have it written that they would be looking at further refinement of reporting and data collection requirements. Should we also include monitoring? Okay.
For the purposes of monitoring.
For the purposes of monitoring. Perfect.
Reports of data collection elements.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Superintendent Nui. And with that, the motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277609 standards for LEA discipline plans and emergency safety interventions draft 3 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading, and forward the rule to the reports and requirements task force for further refinement of the reporting and data collection requirements for the purposes of monitoring. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. The next action item, R277609, standards for LEA discipline plans and emergency safety interventions, incorporated document. And Vice Chair Hart.
I'd like to consider a motion. I'd like to make a motion up front, and then we can talk about that motion. In looking at the technical assistance manual, especially the first part of it, the first 4 chapters, there's a lot in there, strategic plan, a lot of our foundational documents that have changed recently. And then in looking at it, there's such extensive, there's so many different pages. I'd like to make a motion that we refer that back to staff for more extensive, looking at that more extensively and bring that forward, especially considering what we just talked about with the data elements and such. It's something I did speak with staff about, and they indicated that it would be easier given so many different places especially in that first part, that they would like a second crack at it. I don't want to speak for y'all though. So if you want us to go through individually, but we're going to be here a lot longer, I think. So I would like to make the motion to send it back to staff with some of the things that that we've talked about just offline.
So let me ask just procedurally before I go to staff. It's my understanding that the LRBI is incorporated by reference in the rule that we just passed. And Ben, this may be to you or Deputy Superintendent Nui. How does that play out in that the rule we just passed incorporates this document that we are now saying we may postpone as a committee? How does that look like come the next board meeting? Deputy Superintendent.
Sure. So as it is drafted currently, the rule that we would take to the full board would incorporate the former draft of the LRBI. That would be the 2023, correct? Was the last version that was passed through the board. My or one of my suggestions to this committee was going to be that if we passed the LRBI out of this committee, that we did that with direction to staff to update it accordingly, because originally the plan was to only make changes to the LRBI that aligned with the changes to the rule, this rule, as well as 608 that was passed last month and through the board yesterday. And so those were our intentions. So we assumed that that would be an easy fix within a month. But if there's more things that need to be done, the rule would go through with the 2023 version incorporated.
Thank you. And staff, you see the motion on the that's before the committee. Do you have any thoughts regarding that motion and the process that's being proposed?
Christiane Lewis, I'm the Student Services Coordinator with USVE. I would just like to add some context. There are, throughout the LRBI and the recommended changes in this updated draft, we do have contracts to develop trainings for LEAs based off of the changes to 608 and 609, and also just an overall training on the LRBI. In addition, in Chapter 3, there is wording included that will address HB 347, which is legislation that was passed in the 2023 legislative session. So we would just like to put that out there for you to determine, just to consider that information as you are looking at your motion.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to Vice Chair Hart's motion? I guess my question is, Vice Chair Hart is thinking, my question would be, I understand the need to get something to the LEAs, but the risk is that if we do that and then the board makes substantive changes, wouldn't it just negate the getting them something and then saying, hey guys, we got it wrong, or we have different changes. So could you tell us what your thinking is in that regard?
Yeah, so one thing that we wanted to make the board aware of is we currently have several contracts in place for the LRBI, developing Canvas courses, micro-credentials, workbooks, and those all encompass the 2023 version. And so if there are substantial changes to the LRBI, we will need to delay sending out those resources to our LEAs, which they have been very eager to access.
Vice Chair Hart.
Yeah, my where I'm stuck is that I'm aware that there are board members that are going to bring those changes. If we don't send this back and then allow board members to work directly with staff and talk those through, and if we lock it into place here and then those conversations occur in between now and the next board meeting, then we've locked it in and we'll be waiting even longer. And I just know that there are board members that have lots of I just don't want to lock it in right now and lose the next month when I know that there are concerns that if it goes to full board the way it is now, it's going to end up getting sent back then. And so I'm trying to find a way that we can continue to work on that between now and the next board meeting. But I am fully aware of concerns about contracts and training. So now I'm a little bit in a quandary.
Would it be fair to say, given that we've already passed out R27609 and it's incorporated by reference, whatever needs to be done would have to be done by the next board meeting?
609 is
right. So, well, there's a motion on the table, and if no one wants to speak for it or against it or have questions, then yeah. Okay, Board Member Lear.
I think we need to start with something, and even this working group would want to start with some base. I think this is as good as any. I think we ought to pass it out. Giving them something doesn't mean no rule is a forever rule. So I think it's better to start with something, and this is, like I said, a good beginning. So.
And it's my understanding, even if we pass this out, if somebody wanted to make changes, they could continue to work with staff and put a different proposal together, their own version. I don't like that in the sense that it would seem to be duplicative, but it doesn't prevent anyone. Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Bollinger?
Yeah, I would ask, as far as the training is concerned, is it specific to like page numbers and chapters and things like that? Because my understanding is the members that want to move that forward is to condense some things, because the first 4 chapters really talk about the whole overview of MTSS, not necessarily a guiding, like the technical piece of that. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that training piece?
Yes, so the training contract that we have for the LRBI, it does reference chapter, it does reference very specific information in the LRBI. That being said, however, Vice Chair Earl, or sorry, I'm so sorry, I just called you Vice Chair Earl. Is right that we nothing is ever permanent, and we are happy to look at making those changes. And I think that we can also develop a base training, and we can make changes as we move forward. If changes are made to the actual LRBI, then we can retroactively go back in and make those changes to the trainings as well.
You couldn't see this, but as you called me Vice Chair Earl, she walked in through that back door. So just so you know, that was caught. So we do have a pending motion. I'm going to speak against the Vice Chair Hart's motion. I do think that we should pass something today, and that does not preclude staff from continuing to work with those members who would like to incorporate changes. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
that Board Member Hart motion. So with that, well, we'll just call for the motion. Board Member Hart's motion that is pending is that the committee refer the incorporated document, the LRBI, back to staff for more extensive review and revision. And it does not appear that that will be unanimous. So let's take a voice vote, starting with Board Member Lear, Vice Chair Bollinger,
Give me just a second.
Yep. Board Member Hall.
Yes.
And Vice Chair Hart, we are voting on your yes. Yes.
Yeah, I half is expecting, but I made the mistake of not.
Can I know we're in the middle of the vote? Can I ask for clarification? So if this does get referred to somebody, would the rule that exists, however imperfect, be what they start working with? Is that what you're presuming?
To me, the parts of the LRBI that I think are going to be looked at, and that people have spoken about, are not related to the data elements. It's related to the first part of the book that kind of leads up to it. Because if you look at the LRBI, it's about this thing.
That's all right. Just yes or no.
Well, but now I forgot the question.
There's got to be something staff
There
works
is
from.
nothing about what we just talked about that would be slowed down by sending it back so that staff can just look at it.
They could still start with this version. Is that what you were thinking?
It just impacts the training.
Right. I get this. Yeah, I get the training issues, but they'll keep working on that anyway.
Until the next board.
I take it back. Then I'm going to take a personal privilege and change my vote.
Okay. So now we have 3 yeses, no nos, and Vice Chair Bollinger.
I'll be a yes.
Vice Chair Bollinger is a yes. Chair Carey is a yes. That passes unanimously. Thank you. I'm not sure what passed, but it passed unanimously. No, we're good. Thank you.
Good work. Yeah, that's that monkey wrench in him.
Okay.
I just wanted to give them some basis to work from.
Then we have our, what appears to be our last item, and that is R277627 Early Warning System Amendment. And that is, we have Deputy Superintendent Nui and Tanya Alvarez, who would like to key us off with that. Deputy?
I can start out and then pass it on. So this is in response to legislation from last year. There was the school safety bill, as I'm sure you're all aware, that included elements of an or additions to the requirement for an early warning system. In order to facilitate an RFP process, in order to get those bids, we wanted to make sure that the board approved what would be in that RFP. And so you'll see in this rule, if we have a draft 2 in there. However, Board Member Carey has brought a draft 3 that staff is fully supportive of. You have a paper copy of that in front of you, as well as it's online now if you refresh. The changes in that rule reflect the updated code in that subsection 1 that requires an LEA to implement a digital early warning system. It also incorporates the oversight category. The definitions include a definition for threshold and then a definition for indicators. And the language from the indicators in draft 3 comes straight from code. So what is required to be there. And then subsection 3 includes those requirements that an LEA shall set their thresholds based on best practice, local resources, and their individual priorities.
Anyone like to, Vice Chair Hart?
Y'all are going to kill me on this, and I deserve to be, I don't know, throw tomatoes or whatever, but I would like, in this particular rule, I would like there to be some requirement that the thresholds are made public somewhere. Like I believe looking forward that our legislature thinks that we are able to identify thresholds for everybody. I think that's in their minds. And so when they see this, they're going to feel like we just pushed it off. I do think this is one place that as an early warning system rolls out, we need to be able to say, here are the thresholds that were set by our LEAs. I don't know if that, because they, in their mind, 60% of failures that we're setting 10 absence days, 60% of failures, and 32% of Ds are what our thresholds are, and that they can go to some public website and see this. And I'm afraid that if we say, well, we just put it to the LEAs to decide, they're going to go, that's not what we asked you to do. I think in this particular rule, we do have to collect the information of what the thresholds are so that we can share that out in as this early warning system. And there's a lot of questions about early warning systems. And so I'm just trying to be proactive, and I think this one needs a reporting requirement.
Category.
Well, we need to say an LEA report is provided, which hurts my heart. Shall provide. Just, I'm not prepared to make an amendment. I just think that we need to consider that before moving forward.
Vice Chair Bollinger?
Thank you. I am very much a proponent of local control, which is where I do support LEAs selecting and choosing the data points, right, that meet their needs. However, in talking to an individual that oversees this process for a very large school district in a system that they use, I learned that many of the early warning systems use thresholds that are from the Johns Hopkins University early warning indicator system study. And so I wonder, this is just a question to the committee, is if there might be an appetite to amend this where we say we could set some preliminary guidelines as far as thresholds, but also give flexibility to districts to adjust that with their own local boards. That would, number one, help us be clear on here's a baseline. So that would prevent districts that didn't want to change them from having to do a reporting system or adding another layer or creating another policy. But then those that have different needs, it would give them the flexibility to adjust that. So just wondering if there's an appetite for that.
So I've used an early warning system, and I believe 100%, and I would say 110%, but I understand that's statistically impossible. So in early warning systems, but I've used early warning systems with different thresholds at different schools, and I've actually changed the threshold when at the same school based on our goal setting for our schools. So the thresholds were set lower or higher because you never want more than 80%. If you've got 85% not meeting the thresholds, then you have a systemic problem. You don't have an individual problem. So your thresholds at one school, it's relative is what I'm saying. You got to be really careful. And then as your school improves in indicators, then you set the bar higher by changing your thresholds. So you say, okay, we hit that metric, we're cooking. Now let's raise the bar a little bit, which drops your thresholds down. So if we arbitrarily set thresholds, then we are creating winners and losers. And then you've got 80%, your early warning system can possibly lose its meaning because it's telling you something else than who you're where you need to focus the most of your efforts. But at the same time, that is solid research, and I do believe what our legislature is looking for us to do is set those minimums and then allow the local control. But even within the local control, you have to have your school control. So at the end of the day, I like setting the floor, so to speak, but I still also think we need a reporting mechanism because even with a floor, there will be different metrics and our legislators are going to want to know that. So yes, and. Super, did you hear that? Yes, and. So.
Thank you, Board Member Lear.
No, I'm sorry.
Do you have any follow-up? I do have a question, and that comes from line 26. It says used to assess and identify students who may be at risk of academic or behavioral challenges. Where did we get those two metrics from? Risk of academic or behavioral challenges? Oh, please.
May I? Okay, thank you. Tanya Albornoz, Coordinator for Prevention. I believe those come directly from the statute.
I've seen the academic part in statute. I didn't see the requirement for behavioral challenges. And not saying it's not there. I'm just saying I have. They're looking it up. Yep. Vice Chair Bollinger?
Yeah, I was going to say, I believe that is in 53F 4207, the Student Intervention Early Warning Program. So down on 4A3, it mentions behavior.
Right, and that's the criteria that they're saying we need to use in order to assess the risk of academic or behavioral challenges. I'm just trying to see where those two goals came from. Like, why are we measuring academic and behavioral challenges and not two other things? Like, where did that come from in code? Does that?
Yeah, it's in code, but it comes from and this is one of the few places where I can say there's very little disagreement, that attendance, behavior, and grades can predict with shockingly, like up in the 90s percentile of, or percent of our school dropouts. The research is out there, and I just mangled it. But really and truly, dropping out, the school dropouts can be identified as early as the 6th grade with attendance, behavior, and grades. And so that's where it came from. And if I'm wrong, please, I don't mind being embarrassed. But that's the research. So then that research ended up in code. And so you have to measure those 3 things and statistically not correlate, but consider them in order to create the identification system of students that are at risk.
And I understand, and you'll notice the language in green is the language that I added. So I put in those metrics exactly. But my question is not that line, it's the next line, which says, okay, we're going to use the indicators of discipline, attendance, behavior, course failures, and other criteria. That I get. But then we say we're gathering those indicators in order to measure who may be at risk of academic or behavioral challenges. I want to know, where in code does it say those are the 2 end goals?
Sorry.
No, but that was very nice. I won't get those 5 minutes back, but that was, no. Go ahead.
So that does not come straight from code. That was written in this rule to try to encapsulate the entirety of what the indicators are trying to do, but we can change it because it is not in code exactly that way. So
no, and I'm not saying I'm against. I just was curious where it was pulled from. Anyone else want more discussion? If not, I think we're ready for a motion.
So it'll be draft 3 later.
Okay. I move that the committee approve R277-627 draft 3 early warning system. Oh, there it is. Early warning system draft 3 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Okay, the motion before the committee is that the committee approve R277-627 early warning system rule draft 3 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Okay, thank you.